Here's a quick tip if you want to have cleaner, smoother arpeggios. So the first thing that you need to do is get rid of the thumb tuck, which you probably know is normally what people teach when they teach arpeggios. So what happens when I yank my thumb under my hand like this, my hand gets incredibly tense and tight, and you can actually try this. Pull the thumb under the hand and notice how difficult it is for your fingers to move really freely. Now let the thumb
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this video lesson. I'm Daniele Petralia. I'm a concert pianist and a piano professor. I teach in Catania and I hold master classes worldwide. I'm very happy, very glad to start this new way to interact with students and especially with Chinese students. I I would like to introduce you the title of this first video lesson, The Modern Piano Technique, Rotation versus Articulation. It's a very important aspect of our work. Rotation versus articulation. Rotation versus articulation. It's a very important aspect of our work. I wanted to start, before speaking, with this Bach prelude, because I think this is very representative of a big problem. We are in front of a very, very good piano, a modern piano. Our piano is a modern piano, is a modern instrument, okay? But actually, we pianists, we musicians, we play a lot of old, ancient repertoire on this piano. This was the reason I started with a Bach prelude from well-tempered harpsichord. This is very important to point out and to focus on this main aspect, because actually all good pianists know this, and they are perfectly aware that they are playing on a modern piano, but in the meantime they are also playing an old repertoire. Sometimes this is a big problem for students, and sometimes it's also a big problem for professors, because we are dealing with a new piano, with a modern piano, conceived, constructed with a modern way to think, so that everything is totally different than the instruments Bach used, or Mozart used, or Beethoven used, or Chopin used. Okay? So this is very important. Okay? Today, if we decide to play an old repertoire on a modern piano, we are required to use a modern technique. What do I mean with the modern technique? Piano Concerto Number 2. This is also conceived to a different piano. Let's shift now to a very, very hard Chopin studies, the Opus 25 number 11, called Winter Wheel. Composed by thinking a totally different piano. 18th century piano was totally different, was absolutely more slight, was not so heavy like our modern piano. This is why we have to rethink in a modern way all our technique. Because actually the structure, it was totally different. Let's shift now to the Rachmaninoff musical movement, Opus 16, number 4. now to a very important Beethoven sonata, the Opus 57 called Appassionata, the beginning of the third movement.
If you're like me, you love to play fast. Since I was a kid, that was all I wanted to do was play the notes, play them as fast as possible. I didn't really care about the rhythm. Maybe you're like that, maybe you're not, but you probably still enjoy to play fast or want to play faster. It's a lot of fun, but I'll tell you right now, the danger is actually not that you aren't fast enough. It's that you're going too fast. You're rushing. You're tripping over yourself. You're too excited. If you're like that, you probably have similar issues to I have, where I actually rush through things and I don't have a consistent sense of pulse. And it's really difficult for me to just slow down and control myself. And the reality is, when you listen to pieces, performances more by someone who is really controlled and relaxed, they're so much more exciting and so much more intense than somebody who's just kind of like all over the place and wishy-washy. There's no one single reason for rushing. There are a lot of different ones, and some of them might apply to you and some of them might not. But what I've found is, what I've collected more is my experience is a number of different reasons, technical reasons, psychological reasons that cause us to do this. So today I want to tell you a lot of ways to scale back the rushing, slow down, be patient. And this is going to help you in the long run to actually be able to play faster and to be able to play it in a way that's really comfortable and really exciting. So let's dive in. The first point we're talking about today is rather self-evident, but it's important, and it's just having a poor sense of pulse. This can cause you to rush and be uneven. Some people innately have very good sense of rhythm, but even they are not perfect. And no matter who you are, you need to have a metronome on hand every time you practice. If you listen to the most precise and cleanest performers, I can guarantee you they probably use a metronome every day. I'm going to show you a very simple process for using the metronome for building your precision. You're going to start with playing one note per beat, and then once that's comfortable, you'll go up to 2 notes per beat, and then up to 4 notes per beat, like this. Start with 1 note per beat. You might work on one passage for weeks or even months doing this, and you might kind of go back and forth from the different steps. You might, one day you're practicing faster, the next day you go back to the slower ones. Don't skip the first step where you're doing note by note for each beat, because that's where you really lay the groundwork for every note getting the same amount of attention. My professor told me one time, Love every note. And this is hard to do, especially when you have so many notes to play. But keeping that in mind really puts things into perspective. And if you can do that, it can help your music to really shine. So this process is going to help you to place every note exactly where it needs to be within the beat. This is just a brief overview of what that would look like simply, but we're going to do another video next time to dive into that a little bit more so you can see how that looks a little bit with more details and more how to get there step by step through the whole process. The next issue a lot of people have, especially beginners, is that they tend to rush the easy parts, and then when it comes to the hard parts, they slow down. And this causes the whole piece to just lack a sense of consistency and continuity. It's a pretty simple fix, but it's just something you need to be aware of. So when you find the most difficult spot, whatever it is that's the hardest for you, that's going to set the tempo for the rest of the piece. You have to turn on the metronome and make sure, for me, this particular piece, it would be... So that's going to be, whatever speed I can play that part, that's going to set my tempo for the beginning. This will make sure that when you get to that spot that was really difficult, you don't suddenly go, I forget what happens before it, but then you get there and you're like, and everything falls apart. Like the rest of the piece was going fine, and then it sounds great. I'll give you one more example with this. This is probably where you will find this the most often. It's Mozart's C major. And the reason this one is so common is because the beginning is pretty easy. As soon as you get to the 16th notes, you have problems. You'll have people playing which is way slower. And most people, when they do this, they don't even realize what's going on. Like if you start it this fast, really you need to be playing the next part, which is way too fast. So the piece really isn't meant to be that fast. And so it's pretty simple. Just turn on the metronome, make sure you find... And you can do what I just did, go back and forth, make sure that the tempo is consistent. That's going to help you to play every piece, and it'll actually make sense to the listener, because if everything's in a different tempo, it just doesn't flow together, it doesn't make sense. The next issue we'll deal with is any sort of technical deficiency. Okay, when you have a technical problem, let's say your finger's not in the right spot, your wrist is too high. Now, it's important to realize that a lot of times what happens, you have a problem and you're playing. So you rush to sort of compensate or cover up that problem. And then that rushing causes problems in your playing, which causes you to rush. And so it just kind of compounds on itself and becomes a very serious issue. So to deal with this, you need to identify what really the root of the problem is. Sometimes the root is initially rushing. So you were rushing at first, that causes technical issues. Sometimes it's just a technical issue that caused the rushing. So you want to figure out what it is, and then you want to practice. If it's a technical issue, there's a lot of things that could be said for that. But one way you can practice it is by removing time and rhythm from the equation. So you're just going note by note. So I'm not necessarily playing it in any particular tempo, but you might just each note not worry about how fast or slow you're going, and just feel the note. Be aware of the notes that feel particularly uncomfortable or tense. Now, there are a lot of issues that you could identify. We can't talk about everything today, but we have talked about these recently. So maybe your finger is not getting off the key when you're done with it. Maybe you're not balanced correctly. So we've talked about those recently, and perhaps you can check that out, and that might help you to identify some of these problems and help you to not rush quite as much. So next, I want to talk about the way that you group notes in your practicing tends to cause rushing. What I mean by grouping, some people call it chunking, is that you don't just play note by note, especially when you have a lot of fast notes. It's best to group them together into one motion with your arm and your fingers like this. On the very second note, so that first note of the group, this one, that's where I start the group, that's where I start the motion, is on the second 16th notes, not on the beat. And then the next one is the same thing, and the same thing. And here I have one on the beat. So especially when the grouping is kind of in between the beat, it becomes really difficult to line it up properly, and that causes you to rush. What I found is we tend to rush the last note of the group. That note tends to get kind of cheated because we're eager to get to the next group. So make sure that you pay attention to that however you want to group your notes out. And if you're not so sure how this works, you're probably automatically going to be grouping based on the beat. 1, 2, 3, 4, which can be difficult when you get faster. You want to think about the way things should be grouped. But if that's the case, you're likely going to be rushing the 4th, 16th note of the group. And so you'll want to be aware of that particular note. 1, 2, 3, 4. That 4th note is probably going to get cheated. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. So the way that we deal with this is recognizing first which notes we're likely to rush. And then what you want to do is freeze here, freeze here, freeze here, and on and on. And then once you've kind of gotten that into your fingers and that feels comfortable, you're going to freeze for a lesser period of time until you're not really freezing on that note, but you're just lingering a little bit longer, kind of like this. So you can hear all of those notes that I'm lingering on are the notes that I might tend to rush through. And so this is just kind of a way to sort of counterbalance your natural tendency and force yourself to do something that's awkward. And then it's a lot easier to bring back to the middle and be more precise. The last thing that often causes rushing, this is probably the number one factor, especially when you're performing, is fear. We get performance anxiety, you get adrenaline, all sense of rhythm, at least in my experience, just kind of goes out the window. And it's like, I don't even know what's happening. And then people, I've had this happen to me, they say to me afterwards, you're playing like so fast, like way too fast. And it's not really a compliment when they say that because it's fast, but it's totally uneven. And this is probably a common experience for a lot of people. So make sure that you are thinking through how to address like just your anxiety, your stress. It's good to always remember to breathe before you play. It's good to have something to anchor you. And that's one reason why it's helpful to use the metronome is before you play, instead of thinking about all the things you need to remember, just have this in your mind, which is also why it's really important to have your tempo when you're practicing it, let's say a couple weeks before your performance, that you turn the metronome on at the tempo that you plan to perform, and then kind of try to memorize that beat, whatever it is. You could